You can go ahead and start your presentation.
All right, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to share with you some of our perspectives from the founding of our asylum program at Georgetown School of Medicine. My name is Nick Stukel, and I'm in the class of 2018.
My name is Nate Prashan. I'm in the class of 2017.
And we'd also like to credit Ryan Lyon in the class of 2019 and Dr. Raneet Mashori. So to get us started, just a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. First, we'll start off with some definitions to kind of lay the groundwork for what we'll be talking about, as well as some background that led to why we founded the asylum program at Georgetown in the first place. And then we'll talk about the program itself, as well as some of our operations and the educational program we have on campus, and then cover both our budget and our outcomes, as well as where we hope to continue to move into the future. And as they said, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and ask via the chat feature, and we'll be answering those periodically throughout the presentation, as well as we'll have some time at the end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nate to get us started.
So we just want to go over some definitions so that we're all kind of working with the same groundwork here. So many of you may be familiar with these terms, but it's good to go over them. So a refugee is an individual who is now outside his or her country of origin because of a well-founded fear of persecution or because of persecution itself, and they are unable or unwilling to return. This is in contrast to an asylee or an asylum seeker, who's an individual who meets the definition of a refugee, but is already physically present in the United States. So rather than being displaced and now living in a refugee camp awaiting resettlement by the UN High Commissioner for Refugee Affairs, they've now made it to the United States and or some other nation. Asylum itself is actually a legal definition. It's a form of protection under the U.S. law that permits an individual who is granted asylum to work, to travel abroad, to sponsor immediate relatives, very much similar to citizenship, and then eventually to apply for lawful permanent residence or U.S. citizenship. The process of an asylum evaluation is actually a very long legal process wherein the claims of asylees are cataloged and reported. In a broader sense, this is done by the pro bono team working with the asylum seeker to help them move through the process of obtaining asylum. In the context of our asylum program, in this presentation, we'll be using the term asylum evaluation to discuss the clinical appraisal of the veracity of asylees' claims based on physical and psychological findings. And then finally, just to define this further, we'll be using the term clinician or clinician volunteer throughout the presentation. This group includes physicians, clinical psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, and some other groups. And all of these definitions were provided by the Physicians for Human Rights Examining Asylum Seekers Guide, which is a really handy book for those of you interested in human rights work, and I would definitely urge you to take a look at it online. Just go to their website and search Examining Asylum Seekers Guide. So we just kind of want to take a moment to talk about the global scale of the humanitarian crisis that we face right now in 2016. So as of last year, in 2015, as you can see from this graph, 9 in every 1,000 persons in the world was displaced in some way. They were either refugees or asylum seekers, or they were internally displaced within their own nation as a result of conflict or some other human rights violation. And in total, that represented 62 million people, which obviously, as you can tell from the graph, is an enormous scale, unlike anything we've seen since World War II. This kind of represents the geographic distribution of asylum claims in 2014. As you can see, the darker the color, the higher the percentage of increase. So in the United States in 2014, we saw an increase in 36,000 or 37,000 claims, which was an increase anywhere between 0 and 50%. And you can see in Europe, particularly in Italy, they've been particularly hit hard with this these number of claims going up. Italy saw about 38,000 new claims, which represented an increase of over 100%. So clearly, this is a global phenomenon. As far as meeting the need, as I mentioned, over 60 million people have been forcibly displaced in some capacity. In the United States, we've had about 121,000 applications every year or so as of at least 2014. And in that same year, only 23,533 were eventually granted asylum, which represented about 20% of all asylum applications. This is in contrast to the 2008 numbers, which were more like 38%. So clearly, the United States is not meeting the demand of the crisis. But PHR, that is Physicians for Human Rights, and the GUSoM asylum program have worked to raise this number by providing the asylum evaluations that we were alluding to earlier. So the process of an asylee applying for asylum is actually very long and convoluted, but this hopefully will kind of break down some confusion, and this is how we understand it. We are by no means legal experts, but this is a relatively simplified version. So once an asylee arrives in the United States, they can file for an affirmative claim. That is, they send a written application through the mail to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they have 1 year within arriving to do that. That year of that bar of 1 year can actually be a pretty high bar for a lot of asylum seekers to meet, but there it is. So once they've filed for asylum with an affirmative claim, that claim may either be granted outright, it may be denied, or it can be referred directly to immigration court, wherein it undergoes a defensive claim. Essentially, there's a hearing with an immigration court, or in immigration court by a judge, with the asylum seeker there. And then from there, the claim may, again, either be granted, denied, or withdrawn. And then the difference between being denied or being withdrawn and abandoned is kind of murky. Again, we're not experts in this area, but ultimately what's really important to us is that these clinical evaluations that we do at the GUSoM asylum program and in other programs can be used to either shore up the claim affirmatively or defensively. So the PHR Asylum Network and the various clinics have been around for actually quite a long time. This is a quote from one of the clinicians who works with the Asylum Network, basically detailing the fact that this is immensely professionally rewarding work for many of the people who work in the network. So the network itself is made up of 400 health professionals in the United States who provide pro bono forensic evaluations that document signs of torture at the request of PHR. And it's important to note that with these forensic evaluations added to the case for asylum, there's a 90% success rate, as opposed to the 20% success rate that I was mentioning earlier. The first asylum clinic, or kind of center at a medical school, was at Cornell in 2010. They were founded to supplement the efforts of the Asylum Network in general, and to kind of take some of the burden of time and effort from the clinician volunteers and kind of help students shoulder that burden so that clinicians are able to do more evaluations and meet the need further. So our own origins kind of started around 2012 when our friend Kelly DiLorenzo started a group on campus, the GUSoM PHR chapter, focused basically around educational programming about human rights, global health, as a great discussion group for medical students to learn. And in 2013, Nick and I were chosen as the new leaders of PHR. And then later that academic year in 2014, Jillian Tuck at PHR requested that we start DC's first asylum program to meet the growing need in DC. This was the first one, and many of the claims that they were receiving were in fact psychological. So this was a particular focus of the program that they wanted to help us build. For me, I found this prospect to be particularly exciting because I have a background in global health, having graduated from an MPH program, and it was important to me to continue participating in that arena while also doing it in a local, ethical way, and also being able to respond to one of the worst humanitarian crises in history. And I completely plan on working with programs like this for the rest of my life.
And for me, it's been very similar. It's been a great experience of challenging and exciting opportunities, and it's really helped illustrate a community that I don't necessarily always have at the forefront of my mind, and it's really brought to my eyes a completely wider community and a really broad perspective. So to talk a little bit about our mission, we knew that as we were starting up this program at Georgetown, we needed to have some driving force, a driving idea behind what we are and where we wanted to go. And so it really boils down to improving the quality of life for survivors of torture and persecution. And we aim to do this in three main ways. The first, as we've already been alluding to, is bolstering asylum seekers' efforts to obtain legal asylum in the United States, which we do through the medical legal affidavits that we'll cover shortly. Additionally, we strive to connect these asylum seekers with health care and living services throughout the community to really help not just improve their ability to enter the United States, but to really grow and thrive here. And then finally, looking 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we're really trying to spur some interest and investment among medical students and clinicians to develop both a passion for and the skills needed to work with this population. As far as the structure of the program itself, so it all starts and ends with the asylum seeker. And throughout the process of entering the United States, an asylum seeker is typically connected with some representation via several different means, and then eventually ultimately connecting with groups such as Physicians for Human Rights, or TASC, which is a local coalition here in the area, and then CALS is associated with the Georgetown Law School. From there, if one of these organizations recognizes that a medical evaluation, either physical or psychological, could help improve the client or the asylum seeker's application for asylum, they'll then refer them to us. And so we have a pair of scheduling coordinators whose job is to work both with the client or the asylum seeker as well as a pool of student and clinician volunteers. And ultimately this culminates in the coordination of the correct people at the correct place at the correct time to perform the asylum evaluation. In addition to that, as we've mentioned, we also have a continuing care branch, and this is primarily focused on follow-up care. So the asylum program is not a point of care. They're not our patients, but a lot of them have very significant medical needs that need to be addressed. And so we're continually working to develop relationships with different organizations and clinics throughout the city to further address those needs. And then on campus itself at Georgetown, we have education coordinators that are focused on medical students. And so that involves several different types of programming that we'll talk about, as well as some educational oversight for developing interest and raising awareness among medical students. And then finally, the advisory board helps oversee and guide the asylum program. So Nate and I both serve on that now in more of an advisory role. So as far as case referrals, when an organization decides that an asylum seeker would benefit from a physical or psychological evaluation, we get those referrals primarily from two locations currently. The first is Physicians for Human Rights. So this is where the majority of our cases come from. We receive cases from them at regular intervals throughout the year, and when they send us cases, it includes things such as descriptions of the case, as well as a timeline for when the medical legal affidavit is needed, as well as contact information and things like preferred language. We then send that out to our pool of volunteers, and if we're not able to fill the case, it's then given out to the larger Asylum Network. Another great partner we have that sends us case referrals is TASC. That stands for the Torture Abolition and Survivors Support Coalition, that's located here locally in DC. And we receive cases from them on an as-needed basis, as well as partnering with them for continuing care. And one other partner that we're working on developing a more formal relationship with is CALS, the Center for Applied Legal Studies associated with the Georgetown Law School. We haven't done any cases with them as of yet, but we're working on a more formal relationship and hoping to really develop a multidisciplinary program that involves collaboration among the law and medical centers. So as far as the evaluation, once all of the coordination takes place, the clinician volunteer will meet up with the student volunteer as well as the asylee at either of two locations. Both are associated with the Georgetown Medical Center. One is the Department of Psychiatry and the other is the Department of Family Medicine. If needed, an interpreter is also provided, and we do our best also to match the clinician and student volunteers with the asylum seeker's language. So if an asylee speaks Spanish and we have a clinician and student volunteer that are able to speak that language fluently, we'll match them with that case. As I mentioned, the cases are separated into two main groups. The first is physical evaluation, the second is psychological evaluation. And depending on the needs of the client, one or both of those is performed. What happens initially at the beginning of the evaluation is the asylee just recounts their story. So our clinicians and medical students are trained to create an environment that is the least intimidating possible to try to minimize as much kind of re-traumatization through telling the story as possible. So during this time, the clinician and medical student will listen, take notes, and then the clinician performs a physical or mental status exam as needed. So for the physical exam, the things they're looking for are, for example, scars that correlate with a description of torture in the patient's story, as well as anything such as gait abnormalities or skeletal abnormalities. Psychologically, looking for everything from depressive symptoms to poor eye contact or a change in affect. And all of these are based off the Istanbul Protocol, which really serves as the guidelines for judging the veracity or truth of the asylum seeker's claims. These evaluations can last for several hours, and sometimes they may also need to extend past a single session or past a single evaluation day. Ultimately, this culminates in the creation of a medical legal affidavit. So following the evaluation, the student volunteer really comes up to the stage to create the first draft of the affidavit and then submitting that to the clinician. This is really the key for the asylum program and is what offers us an edge, allowing our trained clinicians to perform more evaluations, because by the student volunteer drafting the medical legal affidavit the first time around, that really takes a large burden of time off of the clinician and allows them to perform more evaluations more regularly. And additionally, on the student end, it provides them with a great opportunity to learn more about the client, their situation, and the process of writing an affidavit. Then once that student has completed their first draft, they send it to the clinician, who then finalizes the affidavit before ultimately submitting it to our program, as well as the Physicians for Human Rights Asylum Network and the client's representative. Ultimately, this affidavit is added to the client's application for asylum, which is reviewed in court. And as Nate mentioned, it can be a really important aspect of the client's application, oftentimes raising the acceptance rate from around 20% to over 90%. And additionally, the clinician may be called upon to testify in court as well and offer their expert opinion. Moving into the continuing care aspect, so we've talked about the evaluation itself, and now looking at what happens outside of the evaluation and different things we're doing. The most important thing for us was to recognize that we, as the asylum program, are not a point of care. The clients are our clients, not patients, when receiving a medical evaluation or psychological evaluation. However, a lot of times they are in need of great medical follow-up for both physical and psychiatric complaints, and those aren't necessarily needs that we can meet right away during the evaluation. So that's where our continuing care coordinator comes in and corresponds with various community organizations. Primarily, right now we're working with TASK to provide follow-up care as necessary and connect them with vital resources throughout the community. One of our main goals for the program in the coming months and years is to establish a larger network to grow our connections in this area, to provide follow-up referrals for everything from primary care to psychiatric care to different types of specialty care, as well as different relationships with free clinics that serve the underserved in the area, such as Unity Clinic, Hoya Clinic, and the Georgetown Medical Center.
So other questions so far? Feel free to type them into the chat if you have any. Otherwise, we'll move on to kind of the educational opportunity that the Georgetown Asylum Clinic or Asylum Program serves. So at Georgetown, as Nick was just mentioning, we have this student-driven free clinic called the Hoya Clinic, which serves as a really good opportunity for our students to not only serve a community that really needs the medical care, but also it provides them a good opportunity to learn about urban and minority health. And we think of this as a really good analogy for the asylum program, which provides a much-needed service and also gives students the opportunity to learn about refugee health, about global health, human rights, asylum law, and some of the more basic aspects of being a physician, such as physical diagnosis and simply being empathetic and compassionate. So pursuant to these goals, we kind of put together this educational model, which I'll detail now, based around some tasks and responsibilities that each of the students that participates in the asylum program is required to partake. So these responsibilities include attending the training sessions every year and participating in the human rights curriculum on campus. It also includes writing the medical legal affidavit, attending and assisting with the asylum evaluation. And then these tasks and responsibilities translate directly to some of the educational goals. For example, attending the training helps students understand the current events and refugee issues that are so prevalent today. Attending and assisting with the asylum evaluation helps students recognize the signs of torture and learn the basics about forensic documentation, as well as helps them appreciate the mental health burden of torture and being a refugee or seeking asylum and some other things. And then these educational goals, we believe, will lead to potential outcomes far-reaching as they transition to becoming a clinician. So, having developed this understanding of current events and refugee issues, they will have an improved knowledge and understanding of global health and human rights issues as they're practicing as a physician. Appreciating the mental health burden of torture will enhance the empathy and compassion of a student who participates in this program and thereby make them a better clinician. Recognizing the signs of torture will help them be better historians and better at physical diagnosis. So it's important to note that while all of these have educational value, they also have practical utility for the clinic operations. So this is a case study of one of the students that's participated in our program. This is Maddie Ross. She's done several of the evaluations. And in one of our post-interview or post-case encounters that we did with her, these are some of the things that she had to say. She learned so much about the cultural issues in the native community or in the native country of her of the case that she saw. It was really beneficial for Maddie to be able to see the way that the Violence Against Women Act, which is one of the ways asylees can make it to the United States with legal protection, it was great for Maddie to be able to see the way that legal action was put into practice in this woman's life. She was able to work with one of our clinician volunteers, Dr. Sarah Qureshi, who was really an accomplished clinician, and she learned a lot from that experience just about being a doctor. And then there was this phenomenon wherein Maddie was inspired by working with someone who'd been through so much and still was so hopeful and resilient throughout all of it. A lot of times when we're, when we're thinking about working with victims of, or survivors of trauma rather, we're concerned about the countertransference of traumatic events wherein interviewers and observers may themselves be traumatized by hearing about a trauma. But we don't think a lot about the countertransference of resilience, but it really is a real phenomenon, and I think Maddie experienced that. So we're glad that it seems that our educational model is working. So as a curriculum, the Asylum program, we think about it in terms of 3 broad streams that together work towards these educational goals and outcomes that I just outlined. So these include experiential, an experiential component wherein the Asylum program is available for participation and follow-up. This is a picture of our very first Asylum Clinic training with a number of these students who've been able to take part in our program. There's a didactic component on the left here, we have students teaching students, so it's a really great opportunity for our participants to learn from each other. And then on the left here, we have Dr. Carolyn Welberry, who's leading a didactic session wherein she's discussing the importance of depicting torture in artwork. And then finally, there's an advocacy component to our education program. Here we have two of our new student leaders, Ryan and David, with Global Health Leader Barbara Bush on the Hill, talking about neglected tropical diseases as part of the N7 campaign. And then here on the bottom, we have the social media campaign, #IntegrationIs, which we undertook with our partners ECDC earlier this year. So the education program for this year is basically put together in 4 different streams. The first is a workshop series wherein students are able to glean practical skills for being global health practitioners, as well as understanding the importance of human rights. And so we've kind of put it together in terms of 6 different workshops throughout the year. There's going to be a film screening and discussion series of these films here. There's a more traditional lecture series, including something called Human Rights Leaders Among Us, as well as a health and human rights selective experience that our mentor, Dr. Renit Mishori, teaches. And then every year we have 2 training workshops for working with the Asylum program, one in October that's open to everyone, students and clinicians, and then one in March or so that is open to just clinicians.
So then to just give you a brief overview of what a budget for the year looks like for us. So we have three main aspects of our program that account for our entire budget, and that is the fall training, the spring training, and then our campus-based events. And as you can see, both the fall training and the spring training account for the bulk of our costs throughout the year. So those are full-day events, and so we provide food and coffee at those, as well as honorary for our speakers and the examining asylum seekers manuals through Physicians for Human Rights, which serve as a resource for our trainees to take home and refer back to. We also offer AAFP accreditation for all of our training programs to allow clinicians to apply for CME credit. The main way that we pay for both of these training workshops is through ticket sales. So we'll sell tickets to both the clinicians and students. And whatever isn't covered by those ticket sales is then covered by money that we make from fundraisers throughout the community. Then down on the bottom row in the green with our campus-based events, we hold several events on campus throughout the year, as Nate was mentioning, and the bulk of that funding comes from the Georgetown Medicine student government. So the main ways we bring in money are through both the ticket sales, fundraisers, and then the student government. Ideally, in the future, we'd like to offer the training workshops for little or no cost, and we're hoping to apply for some grant funding to do that in the future. As far as the outcomes, so starting the asylum program and then looking forward to where we're at today. So far, we've performed 11 evaluations, and 1 case has been heard and granted asylum so far. Additionally, we've held 4 training workshops, so 1 in the fall and 1 in the spring over the last couple of years. We've trained 45 Georgetown students and 21 Georgetown clinicians. There are additional clinicians not associated with the university that we've trained as well. So looking forward and making the asylum program something sustainable, which is one of the most difficult things to do in a student-run group, we learned that turnover is really the most destructive factor in student-driven organizations and efforts. So these students, such as Nate and I, that were really passionate about this cause and in creating the asylum program, will eventually graduate. And we've learned that without the appropriate mentoring and transition periods, these types of ventures are ultimately doomed to disappear. So we've taken on several different actions to really try to ensure that the asylum program is something that sticks around Georgetown School of Medicine for the long term. So we've done this in a few different ways. One of the first things we do is we start recruiting very early. We hold several campus events very early on in the fall semester, especially to look at recruiting the first-year medical students. And then from those students that get involved, we select the leadership team 3 to 4 months earlier than most groups on campus as well. So we started doing that in January to allow some mentoring by second-year student leaders until the first years take over towards the end of their first academic year. On top of that, such as Nate and I are on the advisory council, the third years are then invited to join that as well to offer their perspective from their time in leading the asylum program. And lastly, we've really tried to utilize technology to our advantage. We've organized a Google Drive that allows us to easily pass on information from one year to the next and to keep things continually updated and current.
So in kind of thinking about sustainability in the future, there are several goals that we have in mind for moving forward that we hope that the next group of students will continue working toward. So first and foremost, our primary goal is always to expand our capacity for evaluations by training more and more clinicians at Georgetown and otherwise, so that we're able to provide more and more evaluations of asylum seekers and meet that need. Currently, as we mentioned, our capacity is relatively low because clinicians are very, very busy people, and as Nick was saying, these evaluations are extremely time-intensive. So it's important to us to continue to work toward training more clinicians. We also want to develop some more interdisciplinary relationships throughout the community, the law school being foremost on our minds, working with CALS as soon as next year is one of our primary goals as well. We also want to continue building our partnerships with some of the community partners that we have currently, such as TASC, such as PHR, such as ECDC, because we want to continue to expand the care that we're able to connect our asylum seekers with. And then I know Nick mentioned earlier that it's important to us to provide training for free. It's really tough for us to have to ask volunteers for money when they're already volunteering their time. So in the future, we were going to keep working toward applying for grant funding. And then finally, as a more esoteric and broad goal, we kind of want to develop a forum for discussions about human rights and asylum in the DC community, and kind of be that point organization that connects all these other really amazing organizations and groups together so that we can have these conversations. You can see here on the bottom picture, this was our kickoff event for the year, wherein a bunch of students from the Georgetown community, not all associated with PHR, came together as a panel and talked about what human rights and global health meant to them. So we were particularly excited about that event because we think it's a good starting off point to kind of bring all these organizations together. And then this top image you see here, it's a picture of the very first leadership retreat spearheaded by our newest group of student leaders, kind of coming together to make sure that everyone's on the same page, that we're all like moving forward and we're organized to make sure that things are getting done in the way that they need to be done moving forward. So to finish off our presentation, it's important for us to acknowledge all of the many people who have made this asylum program possible. First and foremost, Dr. Reneet Mashori. She has been instrumental in getting this asylum program off the ground, and she's been with us every step of the way. So thank you very much, Dr. Mashori. Our student and clinician volunteers who put in the time and the effort into helping us meet the needs of our refugee and asylum seeker population. They are too numerous to name individually at this point, but thank you so much, all of you. We have had great leadership teams over the last couple of years. 2 years ago was Kevin, Dara, Daisy, Daniel, and Haley. They were wonderful, and now this year is Marcel, Ryan, Laura, Kate, and David. We're really looking forward to seeing what this group of students has to offer, not only to the Georgetown community, but to the asylum-seeking and refugee community overall in DC. We also need to thank the Physicians for Human Rights team, Jillian Tuck and Lisa Manrique, who are no longer at Physicians for Human Rights, but thank you. And now Meredith Fortan and Janine Sawan have both been instrumental in continuing the work that Jillian and Lisa started, so thank you for that. And we also need to thank our supporting organizations, Georgetown University School of Medicine and the Medical Center, including Dean Stephen Mitchell, the Department of Family Medicine, and the department chair, or former department chair, Dr. James Welsh, and then the Department of Psychiatry and department chair, Dr. Stephen Epstein. Thank you all so much for your support. If you have any more questions, please feel free to, oh, sorry.
There is one question. Let me just read it out. It says, asylum evaluations are done for affirmative asylum process, or is it mainly for defensive process in situations when they are initially denied?
That's a great question. It can be useful in both. My impression of our current caseload is that they are mostly done in affirmative, but I would have to check on that. Yeah. So if you're looking for more information, oh, go ahead.
I think that was the only question, at least questions that I've received. So.
Well, if you are looking for more information or you have a question that you don't get a chance to ask today, feel free to contact us at GUSomphr@georgetown.edu. You can visit us at phrgeorgetown.org and then follow us on Facebook or Twitter. We're pretty easy to find there.
Okay, I just got another question. Says, do you have any connections in the Tampa Bay area?
We do not, do you?
I don't.
Yeah, Nick and I do not have any connections there. Why do you ask?
It was one of the questions. One of our sites is in Florida, so that's why they were asking.
Oh, okay.
If you're interested in, for example, a training to learn to perform asylum evaluations, or interested in creating an asylum program or something of that nature, there are several throughout the country. We're not the only one, as Nate mentioned. The first one was up at Cornell, and there are new ones sprouting up all the time. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to do what we can to either find a training nearby or connect you with some people who would know.
And a lot of
yeah, I just want to follow up with that. There's a comment. One of our directors at our Florida site, I think she's interested in contacting you, and she would like some help from you, so I will forward you her information. Another question is, will this presentation be shared to participants? And I just want to say yes, we will be sending out an email with the slides shortly after the presentation.
Great.
And let me see. I think that is it for now. I haven't seen any other, but I will forward you the person's contact information so you can get in contact with her.
Okay, great. That sounds good. And I just want to say one of the motivations for us to give this this presentation was so that we can kind of provide some inspiration or some kind of basic structure for how students or other motivated individuals, how they can kind of start their own asylum programs at their own institutions. But if you want more details, please don't hesitate to contact us about that.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for presenting. I think everyone found it helpful. And we will send out the information soon after. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you all for listening.
It was great.
Great, thank you.